Okay. Today's daf is Daf Chav Beis, Bezos Hashem, and we will begin on 4 lines from the bottom, B'Rosh Chodesh, B'Rosh Chadashim. 4 lines from the bottom. We are discussing on how they would read the Torah, how many people you call up for the Torah at various different times of the year. And so the Mishnah said, B'Rosh Chodesh, U'Chol HaShemoed Korin Arba. You call 4 people to read to the Torah on Rosh Chodesh. So let's just look at the Rosh Chodesh for a second, so you'd see what the Gemara is talking about over here. Shalom Aleichem. Okay, so here we're starting. In Rosh Chodesh, you have a problem over here. If you're going to call 4 people into 14 psukim, you have a problem because each topic becomes its own parsha. And the halacha is, there's certain halachas on how you divide this. You see, in this part, you have 8 psukim. The minimum that everybody is supposed to have is 3 psukim, right? So you can't have 3 people reading the first parsha. At best, you could have 2 people. And yet, we try to squeeze in a third person. If they go into the next parsha, I'm sorry, it's not wasn't put up correctly. If they go into the next parsha ends over here, which is Oila Shabbat B'Shabbatoi, which only has 2 psukim. So this is 2. This is 2. There's 8 psukim over here, and right over here, there's 4 psukim. There's actually 5 psukim here. So there's 5 psukim over here. I'm sorry. So the question of the Gemara is going to have how you're supposed to divide up the laning. Let's read it inside. Ula, the son of Rav, asked a question. Parshas Rosh Chodesh, Ketzad Karanoisa. How would they read the Parshas Chodesh in Shul? Now, obviously, they read it for many, many, many years. What's his question? His question is because they made new takanas because of people. Used to be that people would come to shul, they would never leave the shul or never come late. So you didn't have any problems. But we developed a problem over the years that people would come late after the laning and people would leave early before the laning is completed. You hear? Those are nechnas v'yotzim. So how do you divide up Parshas Chodesh so that you don't have the problem of confusing people who are leaving or came late? If you tzaves b'nei Yisrael v'imart aleim es karbini lachmi, that's the pasuk. The havnei tamne psukim. There's 8 psukim. Heichenevet. Now we have to call up 8 people for the Parshas Rosh Chodesh, what we read in the shul. Nikrei, let us read Trei. 2 people should read tlasa psukim. From the first parsha of Talmud, each one should read 3 psukim. So you get 6. Pashu luhu Trei. Then there's only 2 psukim left in that paragraph, in that topic. So let's just see inside. If we only read 6 psukim and stopped by over here, you can't do that. Because let's say somebody walked out by Oilas Tamid, he's going to think that the next person only is reading 2 psukim. And maybe he'll never come to shul again. And he'll come to think that you could call somebody up for an aliyah and you read him only 2 psukim. And really what we're going to do is read into the next parsha. We're not going to stop by after this topic. So there was such amaratzis. So the halacha is you can't do it that way because you can't leave over less than 3 psukim in the parsha. So nikri abba. So
what if somebody walks out when there's only 2 left? Or what if somebody walks in and they leave after 2, even though you were going to read 4? How can you worry about every possible scenario about
it's amazing.
They shouldn't be doing.
I'm troubled by this too.
1 pasuk left, and someone's going to think you only read 1 if they walk.
He's going to walk right. I don't understand. I mean, he's never going to come to shul again, I guess. And we're worried.
But if anybody, you're saying by default there are people coming late.
The guy walks in. Let's know.
What if he walks in and there was only 1 pasuk?
Oh, so if he walks in with, okay, we'll discuss that in a second. But what we're talking about, a guy leaving early. The Gemara is talking about a guy leaving early. If we did this and answered this puzzle by saying, read 6 psukim and leave over 2, The problem is if somebody walks out after the 6 psukim, he's thinking that they're going to call somebody up to read Zion and Ches. Only 2 psukim. And he's going to walk home thinking that the guy that got the third aliyah only lane 2 psukim. Really, the guy that got the third aliyah is going to read Zion, Ches, Tes, Yud.
But the guy who leaves before laning thinks she didn't lane.
No. He knows he's supposed to. Right. So he's smart enough that he's smart enough to know that they're going to call Kohen Levi Yisrael. That he knows. So he walked out after Levi. He's going to think that Yisrael only read Zion and Ches. And then he's not going to know that they read Tes and Yud. So therefore, that was not a good solution. So again, Nikri Abba. Let's read 2 of them. We'll take the first 2. Okay, that's 8. Pashalu Shiva. Then you have 7 psukim left, right? Because you have a Yom HaShabbos, right? Tes Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet. So you have 7, right? 5 and 2. The problem is, how are you going to divide up 5 and 2 with 2 more people? What's going to happen? Nick, what are you going to do? You have 7. Yom HaShabbos have a tray. Rosh Chadshechem have a chemisha. So, but that doesn't solve the problem. Hey Chenevid, what should you do? Nikre trei mahach b'chad mahanach. Let's read the Yom HaShabbos, the 2 psukim of Yom HaShabbos, and 1 from Rosh Chadshechem. So if we go back, you read Yom Pasuk Tes, Pasuk Yud, and Pasuk Yud Aleph, and then stop. The problem is you don't start into another topic unless you read 3 psukim into the topic. Why? Because if you start one pasuk, let's say you start in one pasuk, a guy who just walks in thinks that the previous oila only read pasuk Yud Aleph. So he'll think that you could call somebody up for a Torah and with one pasuk you yaitze the laning. That's the problem. 1, 2 from this and 1 from Rosh Chadshechem. We have a rule: ein maschilim b'parsha pachos mishloisha psukim. We can't start a new parsha unless you read 3 psukim into the topic. So you can't just read 1 pasuk Rosh Chadshechem and then stop, because let's say somebody walked in, he's going to say, "Oh, they had an aliyah before, and that person read only 1 pasuk." So therefore, you can't solve it that way. Likre trei maha utlosamahach. Then let's read 2 from here and 3 from Rosh Chadshechem. Then pashalu trei. Then you only have 2 psukim left for the 4th oila. Again, if you read 2 psukim here and then go 3 psukim in, right? Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel. So the 4th oila is going to have only pasuk Yud Dalet and Tesvav. So it's going to be it's very difficult. The Gemara has a dilemma. What do you do? Well, you know the answer, what we do, because you went to shul this morning. But the Gemara is dealing with this question, and that's one of the Daf Yomi coincidences, that on the day that we're discussing how to solve the puzzle of what to lay on Rosh Chodesh, it's Rosh Chodesh today. So Amaloi, so this was a question that Ula Barav asked Rava. So we answer Amaloi. So Rava answered Zoi Loi Shemati. I didn't hear the answer to this question. But in another scenario, we have the same problem, because if you remember the Mamodas, to certain people that formed their own minyan on days that they were supposed to pray for the carbon Talmud, the Mamodas that we had in Pershas and Masechta Tanis, these groups of Yidden on the first day by Yom Rishon, let's say the Sunday of the week, they had their own laning, own minyan, where they would read in the regular Kriyas Torah, instead of the Parshas HaShavua, they would read Bereshis and Yehi Rakia. So look at Bereshis. If we look at this closely, the beginning, they would read Bereshis and Yehi Rakia, and they divide these 8 psukim into 3 people, right? Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Now remember, obviously, that that when you reach up to a point of finishing the first day, a new topic begins. So how did they divide that on a typical Mamodas day? And so the question is, Vatani Allah, we learned in the Brisa, Bereshis b'shnayim. The first day, Bereshis, we divide that with 2 people who get the aliyah. Yehi Rakia be'echad. Yehi Rakia be'echad. So the Gemara says like this, Vavinaba, we asked, let's understand this logic. Bishlam Yehi Rakia be'echad. I understand Yehi Rakia be'echad. You could call one oila for the day number 2, the tlosa psuka have it. There's just 3 psukim here, right? Pasuk vayayim elikim, when God did the second day, Yehi Rakia, Pasuk Zayin, Pasuk Vav Zayin Ches, you call one person up. But how do you divide 5 psukim to 2 people when each one is supposed to have 3? That's the Gemara's question. Ella, Bereshis B'shnayim, you could put Bereshis with 2 people, give 2 aliyahs there. Chamisha psukim hava, there's 5 psukim. With Tanya, we learned in a Praisa, a person who's called up to read from the Torah has to read at least 3 psukim. So how did they solve that dilemma during the Mamodas problem? Itma law, we learned over there, Rav Amma Doilig. Rav says you skip backwards. In other words, you read 3 psukim, and then you skip and do it again. So the first oila will read Aleph Beis Gimel, then the second oila will repeat Gimel, Dalet Hey. That's how his solution is. But that's Rav's solution. Shmuel has the Salmonic solution. Ama Paisik. You take one pasuk Gimel, and divide it in 2 parts. The first oila reads the first half of the pasuk. The second guy will read the second half of the pasuk. So you divide a pasuk in half. So Rav Amadoilik, Rav says you repeat the pasuk again. My time ilama pasuk. Why didn't he say like Shmuel's reasoning that you divide a pasuk? Kesavar. He holds kol psuka deloi pasake Moshe analoi paskinim. We cannot divide a pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't put it divided. We can't make up our new stops in psukim. So if it's not, and the stops of psukim are Mesorah given down from Moshe when he came down from Har Sinai. So we can't put an arbitrary stop in the middle of a pasuk. Shmuel says, now, Shmuel Amar Paskinale, would Shmuel hold that you could do an arbitrary stop? But that idea of kol psuke deloy psake Moshe analoi paskinim seems to be an accepted halacha, because Va'amar Rab Chanina said, V'Chanina Krara, his name is Rab Chanina Kara, that was his name. Tsar Gadol Hoyali Eitzel Rab Chanina Gadol. I had a tremendous stress in front of Rab Chanina Gadol because I asked him a shaila. What's the shaila? I teach children, he's saying. I'm a malamed for children, and I can't teach a whole pasuk for a child because he can't cold cup. He can't concentrate. So I have to divide psukim in half in order to teach it. And what the shaila is, kol psukim like pasuk, you're not allowed to divide psukim. He gave me a heter, a leniency that you could do it, but only if you're teaching Tanoikis, young kids, you can do it for. Hoil uslamid, since you're a teacher, this is mamash shasat chak, an emergency situation. Certainly, then he gave him a heter to do it. So how could Shmuel say that you could divide a pasuk in half? And for the Gemara, hasam ta'amamai, what's the reason why he got the psak that you could divide it in half? Why did Reb Chananya get the psak? Mishum de lo yafshar, because he had no other choice. How are you going to teach children if you don't divide the psukim? Hachaname, also over here, lo yafshar, by the Mamodes, how are you going to give 2 people an aliyah if you don't divide a pasuk in half? So that's why Shmuel held, since we have no choice in the matter, we have to divide the psukim in half. But the Gemara asks, but there is a choice. Shmuel Amma Pasuk, my time Amma Doileg. Why wouldn't Shmuel say repeat the same pasuk? Why couldn't Shmuel say like what Rav's suggestion is? Read Aleph Beis and Gimel, and then repeat the second guy. The second oilo repeats Gimel Dalet Hey. You know what the answer is? Because if the second guy starts from Gimel, a guy who just walked in is going to think that the first oilo only had 2 psukim. That's the reason. So that's what the Gemara is going to say. So the Gemara says, Shmuel Alma Pasuk, my time Alma Doilik. Why didn't he say jump back and repeat the other pasuk? Gezerah Mishum Hanechnasin Mishum Hayotzin. Because somebody's going to walk in and somebody's going to walk out. So we're always concerned. You think somebody who walks in late to shul, and some shuls, some people look askance at somebody who walks in late. But the Gemara makes all these gezeres because we're all concerned about that the person who walked in late should not walk out with the wrong message. We care about him. And therefore, doilig is not a good idea. Meisavei. So the Gemara asks a question. There's a brisa that says, Parsha Shashisha Psukim, if you have a Parsha, a little piece in the Chumash, on a regular Monday and Thursday, and the Parsha has 6 Psukim, this portion, Karan Oisa B'Shnayim, you could read it with 2 people. When I say Parsha, it means like a topic. A topic in the Chumash, you see a samach or a pei there. That's called a topic that has 6 psukim. You could call up 2 people. Why? Each one gets 3. V'shal chamisha. But if the topic has 5 psukim in there, b'yachid, you must read the whole thing. You can't even leave over 2 psukim. You must give it to one person to read the entire 5 psukim. Again, the same idea, not to leave over at the end 2 psukim, because in case somebody walked out, he's going to think that the next guy only got 2 psukim to finish the topic. But what happens in the case there was 5 psukim, and by accident, Kara Rishon Shloisha, the first guy read 3, and then he walked away. So Hasheni, so it was ready. What does the second guy do? Hasheni Kara Shnai me Parsha Zu. He finishes 2 psukim from this topic. The Echad mi Parsha Acheres, and then he finishes 1 pasuk from the next portion. The Yesh Oimra Shloisha. He has to go 3 psukim into the next topic. You can't start a new topic without going 3 psukim into that parsha. So, if it's true that doilig works, that you could always go back and repeat a pasuk, leman de alma doilig nidlig. According to the opinion that you could repeat a pasuk, why, if the first one accidentally walked away with 3, why do you have to at all go into the next topic? You should just repeat the previous pasuk that the guy read, and then have the second one read 3, 4, and 5. Skip this. Rashi's not going to it. So why did the Mishnah? Why did the Brises give you the suggestion? Keep reading. You don't have to read into the next topic. So the Gemara says, Shana Osam, over there it's different, the Efsha Bahachi, because there it makes sense to read into the next topic because it's a regular Monday and Thursday. So you could read, if it's whatever the parsha is, you could continue reading Pasheni, into the parsha, because that's the parsha boy that you're dealing with, whatever parsha we're up to. On Rosh Chodesh, you can't go into the next, continue to read further, because after Rosh Chodesh, the parsha of Rosh Chodesh, it starts talking about Yom Tov. And it wouldn't make sense to read about Yom Tov if today is Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, you only want to stick into the topic that you're discussing. And therefore, that's why the Eitzah, according to Rav, was to repeat back a pasuk that you read. Rab Tamchen, Rab Shua Levi, a little bit more on this topic. Rab Tamchen said in Shua Levi, halacha ki yesh oimrim. Halacha is like yesh oimrim, that if you're starting a new topic, you have to read at least minimum 3 psukim in there. And again, what's the reason? Because if you only read 1 pasuk in there, right, and a person walked in, he's gonna. If you read 1 pasuk in there, we're afraid that a person who's gonna walk in now is gonna think that you only started from that topic, and therefore he's gonna think that they only read 1 pasuk. He's not going to know that they started reading 2 psukim prior to the topic began. Just like you're not allowed to start a parsha with less than 3 psukim, you have to go 3 psukim into the topic. Parsha means topic. You're not allowed to leave over less than 3 psukim. Now, that means that because you paskin like the Yesh Oimrim, therefore, not only when you can't start a parsha with less than 3 psukim, you can't leave over less. So wait a second. The Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that simple? Hashta now, ma aschalta the komekel Tanakama. Starting a new topic, the Tanakama says you could read just 1 pasuk into the next topic. But machmire, they're machmir that you're not allowed to leave over in the topic 2 psukim because the Tanakama said that when there's 5 psukim, you have to read the whole thing. You can't leave over. You can't just read 3 psukim and then walk away from the whole thing. You can't leave over in a topic less than 3 psukim. So they hold that you can't leave over. So the Tanakama is machmir already by Mishayarim. So if you're paskening like the Yesh Oimrim, so certainly you should be machmir when you start. Certainly you should be machmir when you leave over. So that's what the Gemara is saying. Shiur, leaving over the Machmir Tanakama. The Tanakama is Machmir even by leaving over. They say you have to read it all at once. That when you start a new topic, certainly they'll hold like the Yesh Oimrim, that you can't start a new topic with Kolshkeit, you should be machmer like the Yeshoimim. The Gemara answers, Mahu Desema, I would have thought like this, that the Yeshoimim could hold that you could do a shear. You could leave over less than psukim. Nichnosen shchichi, people coming into the shul, that's common. Therefore, they want you to go 3 steps, 3 psukim into a new topic, because if somebody walked in, he's going to think you only learned 1 pasuk of the topic. Therefore, we require you, when you're starting a new topic, you have to read 3 psukim. Yoitzin, going out, leaving the shul, lo shchichi, that's not common. The manche Sefer Torah nafki, that you leave the Sefer Torah and go out. So therefore, maybe it's not so common. Maybe the Yesh Oimim will hold that you could leave over less than 2 psukim to the topic, because nobody's going to walk out and leave the Sefer Torah open. So Kamash Malam, that we're concerned about that. So the Gemara says, why didn't they allow you to leave over Mishum Yoitze? Because people are going to walk out and think that the next person is only going to read 2 psukim of the parsha and not start a new topic. So when you start a new topic, they should hold, like the Yeshoimim, that you should read 3 psukim, not just read 1. So the Gemara answers, Amri, a very logical answer. Man the oil, somebody walks in late to shul, and he sees that they read 1 pasuk in a parsha. They read 1 pasuk. He's going to ask, Shayule Shayel, he'll ask the people, what happened over here? Why did the first one read only 1 pasuk? And they'll tell him that no, he didn't read 1 pasuk. He actually started earlier. He was reading from the previous topic and just went 1 pasuk into this topic. Therefore, the Chachamim didn't make exer of nichnosim, but leaving over, they said you don't leave over. They agreed to that. And Machmer not to leave over less than 3 psukim at the end of a topic. So let's just wrap it up over here. Sholach le Rabba Bered Rav Rav Yosef. He asked the question, Hilchasamai, what's the halacha by Mamodos? And by extension, by derivation, what would be the halacha on Rosh Chodesh? What do? Do we divide a pasuk or do we repeat a pasuk? Sholach le Hilchasa Doilik. The halacha is that you repeat the pasuk, the emtsoi Doilik. And the middle one is the one that repeats the pasuk. By Mamodos, when you're calling up 3 people, so obviously it's the Levi that's the one that's repeating. On Rosh Chodesh, when you're calling up 4 people, what's the middle one? The second one, it's the start of the middle 2. So therefore, on Rosh Chodesh, this is the way we do it. That's the final, what you saw this morning, that the Kohen reads Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Then the Levi reads Gimel, Daled, Hey. Gimel, Daled, Hey. And then the Shlishi reads Vav, Zayin, Ches, Tes, Yud. And then the Revi reads the whole Rosh Hashanah. Okay. And all this came about, really, and just to what you walk away from here is, all this came about, this whole mess up is how to do things, is because as time progressed, people would leave the shul while they're still laning, or people would walk in late when they started laning already. And these people would walk away with the wrong halacha. Maybe they'll move away to an out-of-town place and they'll establish a new shul and call people up to the Torah to read only 1 pasuk or 2 psukim. That's why they had to make sure that everybody knows the halacha that you have to read 3 psukim when they call you up to the Torah. I could understand why, by the way. I could understand why that they were nervous about that, because in ancient times, when you were called up to the Torah, you were the one that read. It wasn't that they had a Bal Kriya. You had to read. So if you weren't so if you make it easy on a person who's not so good with words, you say you could only have to read 1 pasuk. Okay, so that people will look for that leniency. That's why they needed to establish that everybody knows the halacha, that you could only call somebody up to the Torah. He has to read 3 psukim. Okay, now the rest of the Gemara goes easy. Zaklal kol sheyesh by Musaf. Tanis Tzibah Bakama. On his Tanis Tzibah, right? How many people do you call up to the Torah? Rosh Chodesh Umaydi Karban Musaf Arba. On Rosh Chodesh and Chalamoid, where there's a Karban Musaf, you call 4 people. Aval Hacha, the lake of Karban Musaf on a regular Tanis, there is no Karban Musaf. Loi, maybe you only call 3 people up. You're adding tefillah during a Tanis. You're saying Anenu. So for that Anenu, and maybe since it's an extra davening, we can keep people and call people an extra person up for the Torah, a fourth person. Tashma, let's bring a proof from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, "B'rosh Chadshaychem Chulay Shel Moed Karin Abba." A Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, you call 4 people. Ha b'Tanis Tzibur, but a Tanis Tzibur, Gimel, must be 3. So our Mishnah seems to imply that a Tanis Tzibur, you call 3 people up to the Torah. So Gemara says that's not a proof. Because Ema Resha, look at the beginning of the Mishnah. The beginning of the Mishnah says B'Sheni on a Monday, B'Chamishi on Thursday, B'Shabbos B'Mincha, Shabbos B'Mincha, Karin Gimel. You call 3 people up. So those are the times you call 3 people up. Ha b'Tanis Tzibur, but a regular Tanis, Abba, you would call 4 people up. So the Mishnah, you infer from the Sefer, you imply one way. You infer from the Resha, you imply a different conclusion. From our Mishnah, you can't figure it out what the halacha is by a Tanis Tzibur. Toshma, look at this story. It's a beautiful story. The Rav Ikla Bavel b'Tanis Tzibur. Rav came to Bavel and it was a Tanis Tzibur. Kam Korah b'Sifra. They called him up for an aliyah. Pesach Berich. He said the first bracha, like, Baruch Hashem Vayrach, and then he said Asher Bacha Banu, Chasim, and then they finished laning. He finished laning because he laned himself, right? But Loi Berich, and he didn't make an after bracha. And then they in those days, they laned first, and then they had Tachnan. Nafal Kula Alma al Pei. Everybody fell Tachnan. Rav Loi Nefal al Pei. Rav did not fall Tachnan. So let's Gemara examines the first part. Miftei. Rav be Yisrael Kara. Rav is Yisrael. We know Rav was not a Kohen. So when they called him up to the Torah, they called him up as the third one. So my time why did he finish off? If he's the number 3, then he should have been the last one laning that day. So he should have made the last bracha. The fact that he didn't, it must be that it was a tiny, because it was a tiny sibur, they're calling a 4th person up after Rav. Isn't it true? Because they're going to call up a 4th person. That's why Rav didn't make the last bracha. So hence we have a proof that on a tiny tzibur you call 4 people up to the Torah. So the Gemara says, "Lo, not so." Rav, even though he's Yisrael, but kahana kara, they called him up for kohen. He's the gadol be Yisrael. They could call him up for kohen. Daha Rav Huna kari bekahana. Rav Huna was the gadol, and they called him up for kohen. So the Gemara says, no, that could only that bishla, but that makes sense. Rav Huna, he was not a kohen. And they called him up for Kohen, Kari Bekahana, because he was such a great person. Even Rab Ami and Rab Asi, who are great Kahanim in Israel, Mikif Kaifla Rav Huna, they bowed in submission to Rav Huna. Rav Huna was the greatest of the greatest. Therefore, you could call Rav Huna to be Kohen, even though he's not a Kohen. He's really Yisrael. Because the Kahanim in Eretz Yisrael are bowing to him. Kolshkein, the Kahanim in Bavel were subservient to Rav Huna. Rav Huna is the greatest. But Rav had a contemporary. Ho'ika Shmuel, the Kahana Ava. Shmuel was a Kohen, Udavar Alev, and Rav showed deference to Shmuel. In other words, Shmuel did not bend to Rav. In fact, the opposite happened. Rav was bending to Shmuel. So, in implying that Shmuel is greater to him. So the Gemara says not true. It can't be. So therefore, if that's the case, Rav was not called up Kohen. That's the Gemara's saying. The Gemara was not called a Kohen. He must have been called up Yisrael. And the fact that he didn't make a closing bracha must be they're calling up a 4th person for Tanis Tzibur. So the Gemara answers not so. Shmuel mami mikef havikav Rav. Really, they called up Rav for the Kohen. And Rav could be a Kohen because Shmuel also was subservient to Rav. But Rav, who the Avalei covered, Rav was in front in public would show respect to Shmuel, but not because Shmuel was greater than him. When did he show respect to Shmuel? In front of Shmuel. In front and not in front of Shmuel, he didn't show respect for him. In other words, Rav was the greater of the two. Basically, Rav was greater than Shmuel. The reason why he showed respect to Shmuel, if you remember, there was a story that Rav had terrible stomach pains and Shmuel is a doctor. When Rav arrived in Bavel, Shmuel gave him a special type of food that caused him to have constipation and told everybody, close and don't tell Rav where the bathrooms are. Somehow this it initially caused Rav a lot of pain, but it healed him. But while it was causing pain, he cursed Shmuel that he should outlive his children, lo yaleinu. And Shmuel's children died before Shmuel died. So when Rav figured out why Shmuel did this and his curse came true, obviously, Shmuel would always show great respect to Rav would always show great respect to Shmuel, like a sort of like make amends of what he did. So therefore, but Rav is the greater of the two. So therefore, he was called up for Kohen. It makes perfect sense that Rav was the Kohen. If you think that he was called up for Yisrael, why did he make a bracha? Baruch Hashem Mavarach. If he was called up for Yisrael, remember the first one makes the bracha. The Kohen makes the first bracha, not the Yisrael. So the Gemara says, it was after the takana that everybody should make the brachas, like what we do today. We make a first bracha and an after bracha. If that's the case, if it's after the takana that we make brachas, then why didn't he make the after bracha? So the Gemara says, Shani Haicha the Yasvi Rav the male Aile. We go to Amud Beis, Mepik Loy Nafke. In Rav's city, Rav established the rule that people would walk into the shul and they allow people to come in, but nobody ever left the shul. And therefore, there was no reason to make that takana that you should make the after bracha, unless the last one being Oila, he makes the last bracha. So in Rav's situation, yes, they made bracha beforehand because maybe somebody walked in late and will think you don't make brachas when you read to the Torah. So you always made a first bracha, but you don't make the after bracha. So basically, where we're holding right now is you don't have a definitive proof of a tainis tzibur. Do you make Dalet or Hey? Could be the story of Rav is actually they called him up Yisrael and there was going to be a fourth person or not. Maybe they called him up Kohen. So we don't know. Toshma, we learned over here in a brisa clearly saying that on tainis tzibur you read three people. Zahaklal kol sheyesh bebitam malacha la'am. If it's going to hold up people from going to work. Kagoin, Tainis Tzibur, a regular Tainis Tzibur, you're allowed to go to work. The Tisha B'Av and Tisha B'Av, technically you're allowed to go to work. Kairin Gimel, you can only call three people up. By calling a fourth person up, you're causing the davening to get longer, and therefore we don't do that. If there is no holding up people from going to work, Kagoin, Rosh Chodesh, Rosh Chodesh, generally speaking, women don't work on Rosh Chodesh. Rashi brings down because women did not contribute to the Egel. In Halacha, it says that a woman should not work on Rosh Chodesh. Obviously, necessity work, like opening the light or something like that, of course. But doing difficult manual labor, laundry, or things like that, she should not do. And technically, a man shouldn't go do heavy work on Rosh Chodesh. He should make it an easier day. So therefore, you have more time to be in the shul, and because of that, we have extra aliyahs. The Chol HaShemoyin and Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to go work except if it's going to cause you great loss. So there, Kairin Dala, we call four people up to the Torah. Shema Mina is a clear proof that a tainis tzibur, because the Brisa says clearly a tainis tzibur, you call three people up to the Torah. Amar Avashi. Didn't we learn something different? Zaklal kol yom sheyesh by musa beino yomtiv karin abba. Our Mishnah says the rule is that if it has musaf and it's not a yontiv, you call arba. Latuya mai. What is that adding? Lav latuya taisiv tishabav. Isn't that coming to tell you that on a taisiv and tishabav you also read arba? Because a general rule used to include something that's not listed in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, first of all, Ravashi mani. If Ravashi holds that on tanis tzibur you read you call four people up to the Torah, that wouldn't make sense either, because we have a brisa, we wouldn't come out like anybody. Loitan, our Mishnah is Loitan Akam of Lo Rabbi Yosi, because the Tanya we learned in a brisa on Tisha B'Av, Cholias B'Sheni B'Chamishi. If Tisha B'Av comes out on Monday or Thursday, Karen Gimel Mafta Echad, you call three people up to the Torah. It's a tainis tzibur. One Monday Amma, the Tanakama holds you call three people up to the Torah, and the same person does the mafter on Tisha B'Av. But if it comes out Tisha B'Av on Tuesday or Wednesday, then you call one person up to the Torah, and that person does the mafter. So it's either three or one. Rabbi Yosi, you're always calling three people up to the Torah on Tisha B'Av. So it seems that every Tana is of agreement that on Tainis Tzibur, it's not four, it's three people. So Ve'elakasha Zehaklal, what it was Zehaklal teaching me. The Mishnah gives you a general rule. It's coming to tell you that there's something not written in the Mishnah that's supposed to call four people up to the Torah. It's Marber on Rosh Chodesh you call people up, and Chol HaMoed you call people up. So the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed to call 4 people up. That says it in the Mishnah straight out. Rosh Chodashim U'Moed Karin Haba. On Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, you call 4 people, and a Zeh HaKlal is supposed to, a general rule is supposed to add something that's not written in the Mishnah. So it can't be adding Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed that you call 4 people. So the Gemara, no, sometimes a Zeh HaKlal doesn't add anything. It just gives you a way to solidify in your mind and visualize in your mind, how did they establish how many people you call up to the Torah? Simona Ba'almiyov, it's giving you a sign, how to recognize how many people that you call up to the Torah. The Loi Tami, you shouldn't say Yom Tiv v'Chol Hamoed K'Adodani. A regular Yom Tiv and the Chol Hamoed, you call same people amount in the Torah. Ella, the Mishnah is trying to say, Nokoit hai klala biyadcha. Have this klal in your thoughts. Call the tafile milsa mechabre. If it has one thing more, or more thing holier than its partner, tafile gavre yasera. Then you add another person to read the Torah. So, for example, on a regular weekday, Monday, you call 3 people up to the Torah, Hilkach. But if it's Rosh Chodesh and Moed, the Ikar Karban Musaf, those days, Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, you have a Karban Musaf, Karin Abba, you call 4 people up to the Torah. B'Yom Tiv, the Asa Basis Malacha, Yom Tiv has an Isser to do work, Chamisha, you call 5 people up to the Torah. B'Yom Kippurim, to do work, is the Anish Karesh, you get Karesh, Shisha, you call 6 people up to the Torah. Shabbos, the Issa Shabbos has a Issa Shiva, you call 7 people up to the Torah. So we ended the sugya, and we came to the conclusion that on Tainus Tzibor, you only call 3 people up to the Torah, and the rule of thumb is that they didn't want to call people up to the Torah, since you are permitted to work on a Tainus Tzibor. Making 4 people call up to the Torah will hold people back from going to work. And that's a tircha de tzibura. They were very concerned about that. So therefore, on Tainus Tzibor is 3 people. On Rosh Chodesh, where you're not really you're supposed to take it easy. On Chol Hamoed, so you call 4 people. Yom Tov 5, Yom Kippur 6, and Shabbos you call 7 people up to the Torah. One more topic, and then we'll stop. Another minute. Gufa, we learned before. Rav Iklil Bava B'Tainus Tzibor. Kam Kra B'Sifra. They read, they say Psach Baruch Chasam Loi Baruch. Now, the Gemara says that when Rav was in Bavel on the Tainus Tzibor, Nafal Kula Ampe, everybody said Tachnan, okay, on the Tainus Tzibor, Rav Loi Nafal Apai. He skipped Tachnan. What's something we all like to do is skip Tachnan. So the Gemara questions that. Why could, if the whole Tzibor is saying Tachnan, why is Rav not saying Tachnan? So the Gemara says, my time Rav Loi Nafal Apai. Why didn't Rav go Tachnan? Because rich shel abonim hoise. It was a stone floor in front of him. Betanya, we learned in the Brisa, there's a pasuk that says in Ezra and Maskis, people are not aware of this. A stone floor, like sitting ba'artzachem, don't put in your house or wherever you live or in your lands, to prostrate yourself on it. So if you have a stone floor in the base of Migdash, you could go prostrate yourself there. But in a shul or even in your house, you can't bow down on a stone floor, because the Rashi seems to say is that having a stone floor was reserved for the Beis HaMikdash. And just like you're not allowed to make your own personal menorah, you're not allowed to make your shulchan, you're not allowed to make your own personal Beis HaMikdash, the same dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash, there's an is in the Torah not to make a stone floor, because that was reserved for the Beis HaMikdash. Hence, Rav looked down on his floor and it wasn't carpeted, and therefore it had a stone floor, and therefore he held that you're not allowed to bow in front of him. Only if it's a stone floor. If there's a carpet there, then you could. And again, you can. This is familiar to you, but that's why they hand out the paper towels by Yom Kippur, so you're not going to prostrate yourself on if you have a shul with a stone floor. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, if that shul that Rav was in had a stone floor, and that's why he didn't want to go, because in those days Tachnan wasn't just going on your left. You really ran into it. You just prostrated yourself, called Pishut Yadayim Raglayim. So the Gemara says, Yehochi, my ear Rav. Why does only Rav have this problem? I feel Kuli Nami. Everybody had this problem. It's a stone floor. The whole shul had a stone floor. And for the Gemara, Kamei de Rav Habit. The stone floor was in front of Rav. Everybody else had carpeting or something like that. So now the Gemara asks the question. It's a beautiful question. Okay, in front of Rav, you have a stone floor. He doesn't want to go Pishit Yadai Raglaim. So why doesn't Rav get up and move to the back of the shul and do Pishit and do Tachran there? V'leizer lagabe tzibura v'limpala ampe. Let him go to the back of where the tzibur is and fall on his face. So the Gemara says, Loi boya lemitrach tzibura. He didn't want to disturb the people because they're going to move out of the way. They're going to get up for him. So he didn't want to bother the people. So you know what he did? He skipped Tachnan. From here, they proved that Tachnan, and people are makel with this, that they don't, you see, for a light reason, he skipped the whole Tachnan, because the whole inyan of doing Tachnan is a minhag. And obviously, it's part of the dinam of the Shachris. But here, Rav, because of Tircha de Tzibura, he already forego the minhag of saying Tachnan after Shemoneh Esrei. If you want to say that the reason why nobody had this problem is Rav Pishut Yadayim Raglayim Habad, Rav would go on the floor and spread his arms and legs out. And that's the stone floor is only usher if you're going to spread your arms and legs flat out on the straw like you're on your stomach. And fall in your face. So no, wait. The Gemara's question is, stop. Fine. So Rav didn't want to do that because the Torah does Pishit Yadayim Raglayim. Nobody else was doing Pishit Yadayim Raglayim, and therefore that's why nobody else had that problem. So the Gemara asks, why didn't Rav don't do Pishit Yadayim Raglayim? Just fall a little bit, maybe go on your knees or something like that. But why didn't he say the Tachnim, but don't do the full Pishit Yadayim Raglayim, spreading out your arms and legs? The Gemara says, Loi Meshanim min Hagei. Rav did not want to change his minhag. His minhag was to do Tachnim, just get on the floor, flat on the ground, spread out. And therefore, not to deviate from his minhag, he skipped the whole Tachnim. And finally, the Gemara says that the reason why Rav did not go Tachnin, because he always skipped Tachnin. Why? Because since he's in public now, he felt that I'm not going to go Pishit Yadayim Raglayim, because Adam Choshev Shani, a very special person, has a difference. Since Rav, his minhag was to always do Pishit Yadayim Raglayim, get on the floor. But if he did that, and people will see that the tzara didn't go away, let's say they were fasting for rain and it didn't rain, people would make fun of Rav that he's not such a big tzaddik. You see, he went Pishit Yadayim Raglayim, and he wasn't answered. What that's exactly what Rabbi Loza is saying, that if you're a very special person, you're not allowed to fall on your face only if you're confident that you're going to be answered. Rav didn't feel Hashem was going to answer him. Therefore, he did not do Pishut Yadayim V'Raglayim. So it's a fascinating topic over there. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.